The world of Avatar is filled with lore and bending techniques that 99% of people have never heard of. Whether these lore drops come from old internet archives or the yearly novels, most fans just have no idea that they exist. For example, did you know Kyoshi was the first and only glassbender? And Yangchen could pretty much make black holes. Okay, they're called airless voids, but it's still a really cool technique that no one knows about. A lot of really cool things have been revealed as of recently, and not nearly enough people are talking about it, so that's what I'm going to be changing today. Today, we are going to be going over all of the rarest and even forbidden bending techniques in the Avatar world. Now, this video is a little bit different than my usual content, so please leave a like and comment to help your boy out, and let's get into it. As we're going to be learning throughout this video, there are many subsets of different bending styles. One of the subsets of airbending is sound bending. As far as we know, sound bending has only ever been done once, and it was by the air nomad avatar before Aang, Avatar Yangchen. After failing a mission, Yangchen would retreat to a secluded beach in anger. I'm sure all of us every once in a while have yelled out in frustration. Well, imagine what happens when a pissed off master airbender starts screaming and bending the air inside of her lungs to amplify those screams. Yangchen was able to do that and carve channels into the ocean with her screams, parting the sea and burying the ocean floor. As one of her friends, Kavik, approached her, he was completely deafened by her screaming, just being in the vicinity of her. And this is despite him protecting his ears. Even though Yangchen never used this technique in battle, it's really hard to imagine what the counterplay to it would be. She could most likely instantly rupture the eardrums of her enemies, which is kind of an instant win button. But as you'll learn throughout this video, she kind of has a lot of instant win buttons, so this is nothing new. While Yangchen's sound bending is definitely scary, the next ability blows it out of the water in how terrifying it is. Yangchen herself hated this ability so much that she referred to it as vile, and even flat out refused to use it to its natural conclusion due to her own moral compass. And that ability is the ability to drain the room of its air. Or to make things simple, we can just refer to it as room suffocation. If airbenders can bend air from one place to another, it stands to reason that they could also bend air from one place, then prevent that air from flowing back in, creating what is scientifically known as a vacuum, or as the wiki likes to call it, an airless void. Her enemies who were helplessly trapped in a now airless room would slowly start to suffocate to death. Yangchen never used the ability to kill anyone though, always letting the air back in at the last second. It's also worth noting that Yangchen was scared of people finding out about this technique and only ever used it when completely alone, fearful of the consequences lest it get out. Personally, knowing what happened with bloodbending, I think she made the right call here. Things get even crazier for Avatar Yangchen as she had another forbidden technique that we need to talk about, which is a direct iteration of the previous one. However, in this version of the technique, instead she would create a small localized vacuum. She did this in the novels during her many battles with the Unanimity, specifically when fighting Ming-Yer. Yangchen had created a miniature vacuum in an attempt to nullify a blast from a combustion bender, but Ming-Yer was caught inside of it. When the wind rushed back into the vacuum after Yangchen let the technique stop, the turbulence was bad enough that it ruptured both of his lungs and eardrums, nearly instantly killing him. In many ways, this is probably the single most dangerous technique in all of Avatar. Unlike most attacks in Avatar, this has zero travel time and is pretty much an instant kill technique. While Yangchen only ever used this technique defensively, it's hard to imagine her ever losing to anyone if she decided to use this power on offense. I wanted to take a moment and talk about Azula's fire and why she's the only one to bend it. Well, actually, what might surprise you is the original intention behind Azula's fire wasn't supposed to be anything special. The creators just thought it would help contrast her fire from Zuko's and make it a lot easier to differentiate between the two in battle. Zuko and Azula's climactic battle wouldn't have been nearly as mesmerizing if they were both using orange flames, so I think they made a good choice there. Later on, the lore was expanded to explain her fire being blue as a testament to her as a prodigy firebender, as blue fire is hotter than orange fire. You can see that she's really just bending regular fire in scenes where her fire turns from blue to orange after she ignites something. In the Reckoning of Roku novel, we learn that Roku, along with Yasu, discovered an ancient text that describes the ability to create blue fire. Unfortunately, Roku is unable to learn the method. However, later on in the novel, him and Sozin are actually able to use blue fire while inside of a spirit cave that amplifies bending. It's stated by Roku that blue fire is significantly more difficult to control than normal fire, and he has to precisely bend in order to not significantly harm his opponents. Keep in mind that Ozai, Zuko, and Iroh were unable able to bend blue fire even during Sozin's comet, which means that the power amp given inside the spirit cave must have been even stronger than that, which really goes to show how talented Azula is at firebending, with her control of it being higher than that of a firebending avatar like Roku. This does introduce a small, maybe massive plot hole that makes Azula seem like she should have been stronger than Ozai, but maybe you can argue Ozai has more raw power than her, as this is more of a technique thing. I don't know, what do you guys think? What if I told you there was a firebending technique even crazier than blue fire? When Avatar Roku was in a spirit enhanced cave, he was able to charge his bending even past blue fire, creating iridescent or rainbow colored fire similar to what we see dragons bend. The fire was so powerful and wild that it physically hurt his hands to bend, and completely obliterated the cave with the same power of a bomb exploding. I do want to shed some light on what might have been our first hint at plasma bending. There is a scene in this novel where Roku tries to make fire daggers while in this cave, but the flames began to crackle like lightning bolts that they seared his palms and he had to let them dissipate. Next up, we have a technique developed by Avatar Kyoshi. In a fight against a criminal gang in the shadow of Kyoshi, Kyoshi's throat was punctured with hundreds of tiny glass shards. Shockingly, Kyoshi was able to use earthbending to remove the glass from her neck. If you didn't know, glass is created from sand and therefore a part of earth. The most terrifying part of glass bending is thinking about what a glass bender would be able to do with a bunch of glass shards in a fight. Could you imagine Kyoshi shattering a window, then sending thousands of tiny glass shards at her opponent? Well, I guess this isn't functionally that different than shooting a bunch of tiny pebbles, but glass is just a lot scarier. Perhaps the most disturbing technique on this list is bloodbending. Bloodbending is a rare subset of waterbending that only true masters of waterbending can ever hope to learn. By bending the blood and fluids within somebody's body, they can literally take control of them like a puppet. The art was famously discovered by Hama in the original Avatar cartoon, who used it to break out of a Fire Nation prison specifically designed to hold waterbenders. Initially, Hama practiced this ability on rats, but then later on moved to puppeteering humans. Of course, she was only able to use this technique during the full moon when waterbenders are at the height of their strength. But this all changed in The Legend of Korra. Knowledge of bloodbending had become so widespread that Yakone, and of course Amon, took this ability to the next level. They were not only able to bloodbend without the aid of a full moon, but they were also able to bend without moving their arms, a technique known as psychic bloodbending. Using this technique, Yakone was able to temporarily beat Avatar Aang, forcing him to enter the Avatar state in order to break it. And later, Amon was able to remove people's bending with this technique, breaking their connection to their chi. Katara even thought this condition was permanent, however, we learned that this could later be solved with energy bending. Due to the dangers of bloodbending, it was outlawed in Republic City. This next technique requires a little bit of backstory. In Kyoshi's era as the Avatar, she wasn't initially identified as the Avatar, and instead a young man named Yoon was thought to be the Avatar. Yoon was one of the most hardcore Avatar trainees to ever live, and took learning the elements extremely seriously, as well as memorizing sacred sites, names of nobles, and other miscellaneous information. Ironically enough, Kyoshi actually worked at the mansion where Yoon was training. Eventually, Janju would use the spirit Father Glowworm to determine that Kyoshi was actually the Avatar, and abandoned Yoon to the spirit after enraging it. As a result of being betrayed, Yoon would take vengeance on the various elite benders who had lied to him about being the Avatar. This eventually led him and Kyoshi to come into direct conflict with one another. The battle between them was close, but eventually Kyoshi got Yoon to lower his guard by apologizing to him for stealing his avatar hood. When she brought her hand close to his chest to comfort him, instead she used an advanced healing technique to rapidly cool Yoon's body temperature, freezing over both his heart and lungs and instantly killing him. Since Kyoshi was technically bending the liquids in Yoon's body to lower his temperature, you have to wonder, was Kyoshi actually the first bloodbender and not Hama? I'm not too sure, let me know what you guys think. If freezing people's hearts wasn't hardcore enough, get this, Avatar Kyoshi was actually immortal. This was referenced as early as season 1 episode 4 of the cartoon, with the mirror saying that Kyoshi was born in this village over 400 years ago. If you do the math, with the time difference of Aang being born and trapped in the iceberg, as well as factoring in the 70 years that Roku was the Avatar, it becomes apparent that Kyoshi must have lived over 200 years. And this was totally not a math error, they didn't accidentally have someone live 200 years. Not a math error, right? But rather a result of her immortality. Okay, I'm joking, but they had a good save here. While it's not directly confirmed, it is heavily rumored and pretty much commonly accepted within the community that Kyoshi learned the secret to immortality from her spiritual guru, Lao Ge. The immortality technique was maintained through constant meditation, although it's a little bit confusing how it works. I'd describe it as forcibly keeping things in your physical body the same through earthbending. One of the consequences of this technique is that the user's body would no longer change once the technique was started. Lao Ge himself was able to live more than 4,000 years using this technique and had many disciples throughout the years. The one thing we don't know about her immortality is actually how she died, though it's believed that Kyoshi had decided eventually to simply let go of life and allow the Avatar cycle to continue. In the novel The Reckoning of Roku, they further this idea. Kyoshi's final airbending companion before her death, Disha, gives some insight into this. Disha pointed out to Kyoshi that so many of the problems they had been trying to solve were the fault of decisions Kyoshi had made many years prior. For instance, Kyoshi kills someone, and then later that person's son causes mayhem as a way to draw Kyoshi's attention to get revenge. Kyoshi had over time become too cold-hearted and ruthless, completely ignoring the value of individual lives in favor of the greater good. In fact, this caused the air nomads to stop supporting Kyoshi entirely. Disha was worried ominously about what Kyoshi might become if she lived another century. In the first episode of Season 2 of Avatar The Last Airbender, General Fong attempts to get Aang to enter the Avatar state by burying Katara alive. This was so traumatic for Aang to see that this did end up triggering the Avatar state. But seeing this, at least for me, it really raised the question of why don't we see this technique of burying the opponents alive more often throughout the series? For instance, King Bumi will bury himself into the ground to travel quickly or as a defensive move, but why doesn't he try to bury his enemies? Although this wasn't really a thing in the original Avatar cartoon, there is a scene in the novels that kind of does this. Zhanzhu, the mentor of false Avatar Yun, was infamous for tormenting and torturing people. He was also ridiculously strong and was able to defeat a group of almost 5,000 people. As punishment, he told them to dig a hole deep enough to hide in if they wanted to live. But even though they all dug these holes, he still executed them all by burying them deep into the earth and letting them slowly suffocate to death. Outside of what happened with the air nomads, this might have been the biggest massacre in all of Avatar. Potentially even more than the air nomads, because it looked like the temples really didn't have that many people. I'm not sure there was more than 5,000 airbenders alive. Now, this is just my personal theory, but I think it makes sense. Due to the sheer cruelty of this technique, burying people alive became a forbidden earthbending ability. There isn't really any official word on if this is true, but it seems the most likely with the information we have currently. Lava bending is an extremely rare subset of earthbending that only a few benders have ever been able to utilize. Most of you are familiar with Ghazan and Bolin lava bending in Korra. However, the first known lava bender was Avatar Sito, who casually has one of the most underrated feats in all of Avatar, using lava bending to erupt 4 different volcanoes at the same time. Many other known avatars were also capable of lava bending, such as Kyoshi while creating Kyoshi Island and Roku using it to destroy the fire temple during the winter solstice. Lava bending is probably the most powerful technique for earthbenders. Ghazan was able to create lava shuriken out of nothing but a few rocks. He was also able to literally bring down the inner wall of Ba Sing Se. Though, like many other abilities on this list, it's not entirely clear if lava bending was always meant to be a subset of earthbending. I personally always thought it would make more sense for it to be an avatar only ability, as lava is a combination of fire and earth. As for how a regular bender becomes a lava bender, it's not really clear. Bolin spent most of his life just using regular earthbending before he randomly unlocked the latent ability to lava bend. Some fans have theorized that lava bending might be a natural opposite to metal bending, where instead of needing a personality that is rigid and strong-willed, you instead need to have a more relaxed approach to bending. Other fans have theorized if you have one parent as a firebender and the other parent as an earthbender, you can become a lava bender, which is true in Bolin's case, but we're not sure for any of the other lava benders. Combustion bending is the only sub-bending in Avatar that's impossible to learn through normal training. Combustion benders are made through special, brutal training. The first time combustion benders were made was as part of the Unanimity Project, which had a combustion bender training facility on a secret island. While the process is never fully explained, we do at least know no part of it, and it involves full submersion of a bender in water where they are repeatedly taken to the point of drowning. The idea is that they can awaken the combustion bending ability by being put in a near-death situation. Initially, this process was voluntary, where the bender would submerge themselves and attempt to produce an explosion to clear the water they were in, but they weren't producing enough results. So later, the trainees were put into chains and forced to produce results or die. Only 3 benders were known to have survived this process in the unanimity, with all other trainees having died. Interestingly enough, it appears the facility was also attempting to train lava benders, or an earth-bending variation of combustion bending, but every experiment involving earthbenders ended in death. It's also worth noting that this was the first time in the history of the Avatar universe that combustion bending appeared, as when Yangchen looked into her past lives, she was unable to remember ever encountering combustion bending as a technique before. Combustion bending itself is one of the most deadly techniques in Avatar. It has been described as telekinetic firebending, where a user can instantly project an explosion at long range. The explosive blast can obliterate rocks or other barriers, or even dispel other types of bending. While Yangchen is able to go toe-to-toe with them, remember she was a fully realized avatar. The combined efforts of Aang, Katara, and Toph working together had a really hard time fighting against Combustion Man. Of course, there are some serious downsides to combustion bending, as it seems oftentimes the death of a combustion bender is cause of their own combustion bending. Outside of the 3 combustion benders created through the Unanimity project, it's unknown how the others were created, but we can assume it's through a similar process. Lightning bending was historically an extremely rare skill that at one point was only even rumored to exist. For example, during Avatar Kyoshi's time, there was only one firebender capable of creating lightning, and well, she killed him. After this, lightning bending would be eventually rediscovered, but would remain an incredibly rare skill. During Aang's time as the Avatar, the only benders capable of it was a short list of Azula, Iroh, and Ozai. What enables one to create lightning is actually pretty unclear. For instance, Iroh tells Zuko that he needs a clear mind in order to generate it, but later Azula is having a mental breakdown and is still shooting off lightning bolts like it's nothing. Now, I could be wrong, it's known to happen, but I'm not really sure she was thinking about separating the yin and yang while in this state, but whatever, we move on. The main downside of lightning bending is that the generation of it is pretty slow, though later in Aang's fight with Ozai, he's able to practically spam it as if it's normal bending, and in the comics Azula does something similar, being able to fire off lightning seemingly with little to no arm movement. She even did some wacky stuff with lightning bending in the comics, like creating a ball of lightning, or harmlessly zapping Sokka with a little lightning bolt. By Korra's time as Avatar, lightning bending was no longer a rare or notable skill at all. Seemingly every single firebender was able to do it. I mean, come on, we have factory workers lightning bending here. You're telling me these guys are the best of the best benders, separating yin and yang in their mind? I don't know. Now, I've made a few different videos touching upon this topic, going further into it. You can watch this video right here if you want to learn more about that. Or if you just want to learn more about the progression of bending in general, that's your video right there. Go check that out. I do want to take some time and talk about sand bending. Although not directly stated to be forbidden, it's definitely a rare technique held close to the tribes of the Si Wong Desert. The reason this technique has managed to stay so rare is because of the harsh environments of which they live. Because of the desert's inaccessibility, the Earth Kingdom's governments never managed to subdue the tribes, which allowed them to keep their way of life a secret. We've gotten a glimpse at sandbenders in a couple of different occasions. One, of course, was in Atla, but 2, surprisingly, was in the Reckoning of Roku novel, where Prince Sozin used their services to find the hidden library. As of right now, we've never seen the full extent of sandbending or how far it can truly go, but since the next Avatar series takes place in a post-apocalyptic world that is stated to be riddled with sandstorms, I'm willing to bet we're going to be seeing more of it in the future.